we could produce all the electricity we need in the UK with only about 1% of our land used. That's actually less than the building roofs that we have. So if we covered all our buildings with solar at only 20% efficiency, today's efficiency, we'd actually produce all the electricity.
Hello, I'm Sumit Bose, founder of Future Net Zero. We are a website that produces content to help you cut your carbon footprint. And the Net Hero podcast is all about that, highlighting people doing amazing things to cut emissions, be that scientists, business people, inventors, or just common, ordinary people who are doing something to make a change. If you want to get involved, then email us, and we're looking for a sponsor for this amazing podcast. So if you'd like to know more, get in touch. On to this week's episode. The sun. It shines very occasionally in this country, but it is there, and without it there'd be no life. We all know that. Also, if you look at what has really sort of pushed the way that renewable energy has been seen over the last kind of 40 years, two things: wind turbines and also solar panels. Solar panels are one of those things that maybe get a bad rep in some ways, but also we kind of think, is there any point in cloudy countries? There's lots of talk about whether solar panels are effective. Could they be more efficient? Could they be less kind of made of materials that require us to dig up the earth and cause more damage? Because there's a lot of talk about that. What can we do about making this industry, which is growing globally and will obviously be one of the key parts of getting us to net zero, cleaner? Well, that's what we're going to discuss on today's Net Hero podcast. And I'm delighted to say it's very sciencey. I like a bit of science, as you well know. And I've got a professor of renewable energy at Oxford University, the first professor of renewable energy at Oxford University. Henry Snaith is here. Henry, hello.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on the show today.
Oh no, I love it. I love it already. So let's do some Science 101 for our audience. And remember, most of them are very smart, but I'm pretty thick. So let's take it right back to the basics. How does a solar panel work? Because I think a lot of people sort of just go, oh yeah, it catches the sun. But I never understood, actually no one's explained to me, now I've got a professor, how does sunlight become electricity? Because I can feel the heat on my skin, but I know nothing about how it becomes power that turns the lights on.
So there's two types of solar panels. One which people can understand very easily, and that's called solar thermal. Sunlight is absorbed on a black surface, creates hot water. That's not what we're doing. That's good for heating your water tank, but not good for generating electricity because it doesn't. The other type is what's called photovoltaics, but let's just call them solar panels. They absorb sunlight and generate electricity. It's done in a semiconductor. So the workhorse or the engine of a solar panel is basically a layer of semiconductor material. And the main stuff that's used today is silicon.
Right.
Same material that's used in your computer processor. So a thin sliver of silicon wafer absorbs the sunlight, and that kinetic energy from the sunlight is turned into kinetic energy in electrons. An electron are the particles that drive electrical current in your external circuit.
So the I think it's called a photon, isn't it? A little packet of light.
Particles of light are called photons, yeah.
So that wiggles down, if I remember my old physics and chemistry, and it wiggles down and it's got energy. And you're saying what it does is when it hits that silicon, it jiggles around the electrons in that, and that makes us electricity.
Yes.
That's a very basic way of explaining that. I don't know if that's right.
It is. It's perfectly right. If you want to get to another level of depth that you probably don't, it's the energy is absorbed in the electrons that are forming the bonding in the surface. They're the electrons in the surface atoms of the silicon, and then they go up to higher energy states. But it's the kinetic energy in those electrons that drives the current.
So what makes them efficient? So obviously you've told me how it works. So what percentage, and this is a bit of a ballpark figure, but an average solar panel that's out there now, how much sun that hits it gets turned into electricity? 5%, 10%, 100%?
So the panels today, you can never get 100%. If you had an absolutely perfect solar cell, looking at the laws of physics, how we understand this process, the maximum efficiency for a single material like silicon would be about 31% efficiency.
Right.
So that would be perfect. The panels today are around 20 to 22%. So they're pretty good.
They're more than I thought, actually. I thought they're about 10%.
Yeah, they've been developed obviously since the 1950s, and there's been a lot of progress, and they're up to a reasonable efficiency. So about a fifth of the energy in the sun is converted to electrical energy.
And the way it's done, and people probably maybe have them in their offices or they've seen them around, is the power comes in to a sort of, I think they call it an inverter or something, and it converts that current into, which is DC, direct current, is that right? And then it turns into the AC that we plug our computers and everything into.
Yeah, so I mean that in itself, we could have a debate over that whole process, because obviously you plug your computer into the plug socket because it's AC, but then that's converted back to DC.
Yeah, I know. It seems like a lot of wasting.
The computers. There's waste at every stage. So if you're generating power in a building, there's a big argument towards actually having a DC network for plugging in all these appliances, but that's
another one.
That's a topic by itself.
So now, first of all, congratulations on being a professor of renewable energy. Before we start recording, I thought that was cool, and you're the first one, so that must be pretty good.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have these named professorships in the university, and it's obviously a great honour and a privilege to be one.
But it's brilliant to show that this is now a field, you know, just like a professor of physics, that people are thinking about. There's a whole scope of renewable energy.
Absolutely. And it's not just solar what I do. It's all the scope of renewable energy, and it really emphasizes the importance of it, and actually recognition from the physics department in Oxford University that this is an area that really needs to be pushed now and in the future.
So we've done the basics of what a solar cell is. Now, the big controversy I said in the intro is people think they won't work in cloudy countries like ours, and they talk about all the crap that goes with digging this stuff up, the huge carbon footprint before you get to these things. So let's address those two things before we talk about what you've been researching. Number one, does it work here or in Germany or Holland?
Short answer, absolutely, yes.
Right.
So yes, we don't have much sun, but in the UK we have so I'm going to give you a number, 120 watts per square metre is our daily average. So imagine your 100-watt light bulb. So on a 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, you basically got enough power to power a light bulb from every square metre space in an old light bulb, a really bad.
Yeah, the ones I used to have, exactly.
How you can light your house now with a square metre in the UK.
Wow.
And so, yes, somewhere sunnier has more. If you go to North Africa,
absolutely,
you're sort of 250 watts, so 2.5 light bulbs. But we still have old light bulbs. We still have a fair amount of power. So it's very usable. And we could produce all the electricity we need in the UK with only about 1% of our land used. That's actually less than the building roofs that we have. So if we covered all our buildings with solar at only 20% efficiency, today's efficiency, we'd actually produce all the electricity.
And this is the thing that, people have talked about for years. I think I did a documentary about it looking in Holland years ago, probably 20 years ago, and people were like, the roof tiles, the slates would be solar. And none of that's really taken off. So we still see large panels, and they're expensive and they cost a lot. And some businesses will invest, but there's always that thing of kind of installation cost to return. Why do you think that hasn't taken off? If you just said what you've said, which is actually it could really solve our energy needs, and they are still effective with, with our grey skies, why hasn't it taken off when this technology has been around, as you say, since the 50s?
It has been around since the 50s, but it is getting cheaper and cheaper. And we're now at the point where actually it really makes sense to generate power locally and install solar farms in the UK. So the recent cost of solar installation in the UK is about 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour. Over the last year or so, there's been some price purchase agreements where they've been about 4.5 pence a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Now that is competitive with gas-fired power station in the UK.
Yeah.
We can come on to discussion, what do you do when it's not sunny, and storage.
Of course.
That's a separate thing. But the cost of generating, even in the UK, is as cheap as these other means. But until you get to that tipping point, you're not going to suddenly deploy it. Now, going forward, we're at that point that you really need to. And of course, this isn't where solar's got to and it's going to stay at this cost. It's still getting less and less expensive. But if you come to your house, a big issue has been the pulling of the feed-in tariff in 2015.
Yeah, exactly.
Which suddenly made it questionable. And we lost all the impetus we had, and that whole industry deploying solar into the houses, all the electricians and skilled workforce who were doing it had to do other stuff. It's coming back now. So we're seeing a rise because as a standalone technology, it's now cost competitive on your own roof to produce the power. But something that we're missing is the industrial buildings, the warehouses, supermarkets. This is where there's a massive amount of space. Actually, those buildings could offset a large fraction of their power demand if they produced the power and used it at source. Often these roofs are not so strong enough to hold traditional panels. So that's where actually lightweight modules could really be deployed very well.
You've teased me well. This is good. I like it. But before we go on to what you've been looking at, the second point about the criticism people have, and it's a valid one for everything, right? There's a cost to everything. But, the silicon has to be mined, right? There's these massive mines digging up stuff, loads in China, loads in other parts of the world. The cost of then fabricating the things, using stuff from the fossil fuel industry to make the plastics and the resins and all of that. How would you say, as an academic, that issue, there's so many things you could read in the public domain that says it's kind of awful and evil, and other people say, no, hang on, it's actually much less than you think, or it's actually more sustainable than, the old digging up coal. Where do you sit on that thing about the kind of environmental cost of solar?
Firstly, it's a really important point, and it's something that is being considered very seriously. There's a European prerogative coming out about eco-labeling, where renewable energy technologies actually have to go through an eco-assessment to see how sustainable they are. In universities and research groups, and we're involved in a lot of collaborative projects where we have life cycle assessments. So this is where you look at the whole life of producing a PV module, where you're looking at all the raw elements that go into it. You're looking at the mining, you're looking at the sourcing of it, the transport, the energy that's put into manufacturing, and then the end of life as well. What happens? How are they recycled? Can it be circular? Can you take the materials that you mined 20 years ago for your panel, reuse them and put them back in? And the answer to all these questions is yes, you can. But in doing this analysis, you realize some materials are more damaging to the environment than others. I'll just give you one example because it's something most people are aware of. Indium is a material that's used in a transparent conducting film. It's an electrode used in some solar technologies. It's used in your smartphone. It's one of the rare materials that's quite costly to mine and has an environmental impact. There's lots of work trying to find substitutions from indium. Indium tin oxide is the material that's generally used. So moving to aluminium doped zinc oxide. And I've just got very specific there, but that is a much, much more sustainable material. So 100 times more sustainable, 100th of the environmental impact in the mining and the use. So this is an example, and it's happening all over the place. So specifically for photovoltaics, people are trying to use less silicon because there's quite a lot. So thinner wafers, removing indium, substituting it, and silver is the other one, where there's a large use of silver in solar for the conductive ribbons and metal, the conductors basically. Moving towards copper, for instance, you think copper mines aren't necessarily sustainable. They're a lot more sustainable than silver. So that's an example of a transition.
And I think that's where people miss out because they all just see the documentaries of, poor little kids in Africa digging up cobalt with their hands and all of that. And I think there is a lot of kind of confusion because some mining is done very responsibly and some is done totally irresponsibly. But you still have to mine the stuff, don't you?
Absolutely. But a lot of what we can do, especially in the academic work in the universities, is look to what do we have to do to make the ultimately sustainable technology. And then we can dedicate our research towards that. It's sometimes too explorative for companies to do. So companies need to manufacture, get product that's profitable, makes money today, and keeps them revenue positive. they can't put a lot of resource and effort into finding new materials that are going to be more sustainable. It's something that the government-funded academic scientific projects are ideally suited for.
Well, this is the bit. This is the science bit, the drum roll bit. So let's get to what you've come up with, which I think, your research team. So I'm going to try and pronounce this. Perovskites. Is that right, roughly?
That's correct. Perovskites, yeah.
Okay, tell us about this. So in a nutshell, so listeners can get it, you found a material that could hopefully replace the silicon, and it's about 25% more efficient or something like that. So talk us through it. Where did it come from? How has it been discovered? What does it do? And is it being used? So let's go through those bits.
Perovskites, the materials we found work really well as a solar energy absorber and a solar cell material, are based on metal halide perovskites.
So what is that?
So that's metals. Yeah. And halides are like iodine, chlorine, and bromine.
Okay.
And these are what we call hybrid materials, or organic inorganic. So actually one of the positively charged ions is an organic molecule, and it assembles into a crystal. That's the material. That was actually first reported in a scientific paper in 1839. So it's been around a little while. It was first used in a sort of prototypical solar cell by a group in Japan in 2009. And we actually started collaborating with this group, and we worked out how to make really efficient solar cells with this material. And from that point, it was really apparent that this material is something that could not just compete with silicon, which is what we're using today, but actually do the job a lot better than silicon with more efficiency. And importantly, especially concerning our discussions on sustainability, much less material. So in terms of the absorption of light, we need about 100th of the thickness of silicon to absorb the same amount of light in these perovskite materials. Wow. So they're much, much thinner. So we use a very thin coating of this material. Another aspect that's really important is that they're processed. The highest temperature we have to go to in processing is about 100 degrees C. So there's not very much heat energy involved. To compare that with traditional solar, the silicon ingots have to be formed at about 2000 degrees.
Wow.
A lot of temperature goes into that. So they're an extremely sustainable technology. But what's most exciting for industry and what's most important is we can produce a lot more power per square meter.
That's it. You're going to say, so is it about 25%? How much more efficient are they?
So they're about 20 to 25% more efficient than the silicon today.
Right.
Actually, our roadmap and our technology roadmap of where we can take it, we should get to about twice the efficiency of today's modules. So ultimately, we should get to 40 to 45% efficient modules rather than 20 to 22 that they are today.
So this brings me to a future where this stuff is more sustainable when you get it out the ground, more sustainable when you make the thing, bigger bang for your buck in terms of the power it delivers. But the question is, obviously, one thing that frankly pisses people off about solar farms is they take up loads of land. So can this stuff be made smaller, thinner? Can it be in smaller surface areas? Or would you actually need the same amount of surface area to give you that kind of equivalent power, even though it's more efficient?
So no, one point is the power. So the amount of land you need for a given power output scales so inversely with the efficiency. So if they're twice as efficient, we need half the land to produce the same amount of power. Perfect. So certainly transitioning to this technology and driving the performance up towards 40, 45% modules means we'll need less land for our future deployment. But on top of this, because we've got the option of making these things lightweight, we can also use the land we're already using. And I mentioned buildings, but they're clearly the first logical point to put solar. To replace our roofs or clad our roofs in solar, not just domestic, but industrial buildings as well. And then also look at other places with surface. And if you think about, you mentioned taking the solar, converting it to DC, AC, back to DC. If you can use it at point of generation, it is cheaper for you and much more effective.
Of course.
Having vehicles coated in solar panels, where they charge the batteries directly from anything that's absorbed, is a perfect way to do it. You offset then the requirement for charging, you elongate your range.
But is this material something you think, basically it absorbs light, right? Yeah. So it doesn't have to be in a solar panel, does it? It could be kind of used anywhere.
So as a material itself, it could be used in other configurations. It doesn't have to be in what you visualize as a solar panel, as in a rigid panel.
Yeah.
It does need to be constructed into a device with electrode. So you need to get the power out.
But could it be like a film on a window, for example, or like you talked about, could it be sprayed onto a car roof or
So
things like that?
it absolutely could be a film on a window, a film laminated onto the top of a car. In our sort of futuristic dreams, we imagine rocking up with a few cans of spray paint and you spray down the bottom electrode,
That's
the
it.
solar cell, the top electrode.
My Ford Capri has got a new lifespan.
Exactly. Not impossible. It's not beyond the laws of physics, but that's certainly, let's say, it's quite blue skies thinking, or some people might say sort of dreaming. But it's so I think in reality over the near to mid-term there'll be foils made in factories that you can then laminate adhere onto stuff. It's not impossible that at some point you come up with a basic solar cell that you can spray on, but I don't want to try to pretend that that's what's going to be sold even in 2030. This is something for a long way in the future.
So your team's been working on this. You've been leading all of this, and I love scientists because you always come up with weird crap and it's like fantastic. But the real problem, and business will say, "Ooh, will it be deployed? How much will it cost? Getting it to scale." You've done some work on that. So explain where we are with this material.
So I have a startup company that we spun out from the university, and we've been ramping up the technology and ramping up manufacturing for this perovskite technology. In fact, the first 2024 is quite a key year because we've actually recently sold our first product.
It is a solar panel, is it?
It's a solar panel. So these look like normal solar panels, but they produce more power, about 20% more power than a normal solar panel because they've got these perovskite materials in them. And they've been sold. So first product's been shipped.
Congrats.
It's in a solar farm somewhere in the US. We can't say who the customer is.
Of course.
But they're deployed and they're working. So this is a milestone. But the real impact will come when we've ramped up to higher volume. So over the next few years, we'll be building up to multiple gigawatts per year manufacturing. And I would say it's not just us as well. So we are, with Oxford Photovoltaics, we're pushing this. But there are tens of companies around the world also building up manufacturing capacity with these materials. A lot in China, so this is going to be a lot of competition. But we're seeing multiple gigawatt factories being built today with this new material. So it's happening now.
Is it being built here? Because this is the other thing that we have a brilliant history, like with graphene, where we come up with the science, but then we never sort of exploit it enough in this country. Where are you making this stuff?
So I would say, sadly, Oxford Photovoltaics, sadly for the UK PLC, is manufacturing in Germany because there was a suitable site there.
Gotcha.
And there was also at the time the European incentive, which unfortunately due to Brexit we were not part of. We were not able to access. But there's every photovoltaics are needed, solar energy is needed everywhere. Yeah. There's absolutely no reason why this can't be manufactured in the UK, but it has to be competitive. The right incentives have to be put in place to have renewable energy generation technologies manufactured in the UK. And that will then enable it to happen and access to the right markets as well.
They got the new Labour government in, and they've, put old Ed Miliband's making his mad videos where he's like zany, constantly talking about what he's doing. We need this sort of stuff championed, don't we, really? If we're making these great scientific discoveries and yet you're having to manufacture abroad, I mean, there's something disconnected there. What do you want them to do? I
would like the UK government to put in a incentive scheme that makes it very competitive to manufacture in the UK. And this is in the form of tax breaks, reliefs, availability of inexpensive capital to build the factories, basically put a package together that makes the UK the place, the most economically sensible place to build renewable energy technologies and specifically solar photovoltaics. It's absolutely possible. This could be one advantage of having left the European Union. We could actually set our own rules for how we do this. But that has to happen. There has to be organization. There has to be a focus. They have to look at what other countries are doing, like the IRA in the USA, Inflation Reduction Act, very proactive. It's caused a lot of inward investment in building renewable energy generation and manufacturing capacity. We need to do something even better than that. And then the other aspect is the UK, they've got these free ports where there is benefit for trade and import and export. We really need to look at how the UK can be an ideal place to reach a global market. Because even for a large, if we make a 10 gigawatt factory in the UK, actually that'll satisfy the UK's demand for solar pretty quickly. Solar is manufactured on a scale. It has to be a global market. We have to be manufacturing and then exporting beyond the single country of origin.
I think everything you've said is brilliant. And also, I think it's brilliant that we've got some science like this happening right now, which is always great because it's the things that drives the innovation. Are you proud of what you've done? You should be.
I am pretty proud. I'll be very proud when we genuinely have gigawatt scale production and we're deploying and actually turning the needle on this climate issue, really offsetting some of the carbon issue.
Well, look, I think you're on the way. You're on the way for sure. Brilliant to talk to you. Thank you so much. What's the actual? Have you given it a name? Everyone likes to give their products a name because perovskite is a little bit tricky.
So we have not yet, and of course we're dealing on business to business at the moment. But there certainly will be product names.
Okay, I've got it. I've got one for you. Snaithium. How's that?
I think that might be seen as slightly too egocentric.
I like it though. It'll work. Henry, brilliant talking to you. Thank you. If anyone who's sort of just curious, can they find out any about this stuff? Have you got a website where it would be, or is it all kind of?
So you can, if you look on the Department of Physics, Oxford University Department of Physics website and search Snaith Group or Photovoltaic and Optoelectronics Group, and then if you also search for Oxford PV Limited.
Oxford PV. All right.
You'll get information about the commercial stuff.
Brilliant. Well, if there's people listening who are thinking about putting in this stuff, best of luck with trying to scale it up. Be good to hear how efficient the one in America is and see if we can get this going here. Henry, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Great to talk to you.
Tell us, viewers, what you think about this. I think it's brilliant technology. It's science coming into business. It's going to make a difference towards our carbon footprint. Let us know what you think. Get in touch on social media. And if you want to be on the podcast, email me. You know the score. nethero@futurenetzero.com. See you soon.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.